She didn't slam the door when she left, and somehow that made it worse. The silence that followed felt intentional, like she wanted it to echo. I stood there watching the hallway, waiting for the sound of her coming back, even though I knew she wouldn't. Her overnight bag was small, but it carried something heavier than clothes. It carried distance. It carried doubt. And for the first time in 2 years, it carried the possibility that she might not come back at all. My name is Carter Whitfield. And that moment in my townhouse in Greenwich, Connecticut, was when I realized that love doesn't always break loudly. Sometimes it fractures quietly, while both people are still standing in the same room. Sloane Harrington had always been composed. Not cold, but controlled. The kind of woman who measured her words carefully and rarely lost emotional balance in public. That's why the tremor in her voice before she left didn't match her personality. I can't deal with this right now. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She just withdrew. And somehow, that hurt more than any argument we'd ever had. Because arguments meant she was still fighting for something. This felt like she was stepping away from the fight entirely. We had been together for 2 years. Met at a private fundraising event in Manhattan. Both of us navigating similar social circles, similar expectations, similar pressure to appear like we had everything under control. And for a long time we did, at least on the surface. But control has a cost. And somewhere along the way, we stopped noticing the small cracks forming beneath everything we had built. It started subtly. Late replies to messages. Shortened conversations. A shift in how she looked at me when I spoke about my work. Not disinterest. Not even disappointment. Just distance. The kind you can't confront directly because it doesn't have a clear shape. I told myself it was stress. She had just been offered a partnership track at her firm. Longer hours. Higher expectations. Less room for anything emotional, including us. So I adapted. I gave her space. I minimized my needs. I convinced myself that supporting her meant stepping back. But space, when left unchecked, doesn't always create balance. Sometimes it creates separation. And I didn't realize how far apart we had drifted until that night. It was a Thursday. I had come home earlier than usual. Canceled a client dinner because I thought we needed time together. Real time, not the kind squeezed between obligations. I found her in the bedroom, folding clothes into that small overnight bag. Methodical, quiet, focused, like she had already made the decision before I walked in. "What's going on?" I asked. She paused for a second, then resumed folding. "I just need time. No explanation. No argument. Just a conclusion." That was the moment everything shifted. Not because she was leaving, but because she had already emotionally left before she packed that bag. Before we go further, tell me this. If someone you love asks for space without explaining why, do you give it to them, or do you push for answers? Because in that moment, I chose wrong. I didn't push. I didn't ask the hard questions. I let her walk out with uncertainty still sitting between us. And that silence became the most dangerous part of everything that followed. The first night was the hardest. Not because she was gone, but because I didn't know where she was. Not in a controlling way, but in a way that made me question how much of her life I actually understood. We had shared routines, shared plans, shared expectations, but apparently not shared clarity. She didn't answer my text that night, or the next morning, or the afternoon after that. By the second day, concern started to shift into something else. Not anger, not yet, but a quiet discomfort that sat beneath everything I did. I kept replaying our last few weeks, trying to identify the moment where something changed, trying to understand what exactly she couldn't deal with. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something unsettling. There wasn't a single moment. There were dozens of small ones. Moments I had ignored. Moments I had minimized. Moments where she had probably been trying to communicate something, and I had been too focused on maintaining stability to actually hear it. On the third day, she finally responded. "I'm safe. I just need more time." That was it. No explanation. No timeline. Just distance reinforced again. That message should have reassured me. But it didn't. Because safety wasn't the question I needed answered. The real question was whether she still saw a future with me. And she wasn't addressing that at all. That's when doubts started to take shape. Not loud, not dramatic, but persistent. I started noticing things I hadn't questioned before. How she had been more guarded with her phone. How she avoided certain conversations about long-term plans. How her emotional availability had slowly decreased over time. And for the first time, I allowed myself to consider a possibility I hadn't wanted to face. What if this wasn't about needing time? What if this was about leaving, just slowly enough to make it feel less abrupt? By the 5th day, I stopped reaching out. Not because I didn't care, but because I realized something important. If someone needs space to figure out whether they want to be with you, your constant presence doesn't help. It pressures, and pressure doesn't create clarity. It creates resistance. So I stepped back, and that was the hardest decision I had to make, because doing nothing feels like losing control. But sometimes, doing nothing is the only way to see the truth clearly. On the 7th day, she came back. No warning, no message, just a quiet knock on the door. She looked the same, but something about her energy had shifted. Less tension, more certainty, and that terrified me more than her leaving ever did. Because certainty doesn't always mean resolution. Sometimes it means decision. We sat across from each other in the living room, the same room where everything had started to unravel. And for the first time in a week, there was no distance between us. But there was something else. Honesty. I've been thinking a lot, she said, and I could already feel where this was going. Not because of her words, but because of how calm she was while saying them. I don't think we've been growing in the same direction. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't blame. It was observation. And somehow, that made it harder to argue with. Because she wasn't attacking me. She was explaining her reality. And I couldn't deny that part of it was true. We had been maintaining something. Not building it. Maintaining it. Keeping it stable. Predictable. Comfortable. But not evolving. And comfort, when it replaces growth, slowly becomes distance. Before we go further, be honest. If you were in my position, would you fight to fix things at that moment? Or would you accept what the other person is telling you, even if it hurts? Because this is where most people make a mistake. They confuse attachment with alignment. I looked at her, and for a moment I wanted to argue, to convince her that we could fix this, that we just needed to try harder. But then I realized something uncomfortable. Trying harder doesn't always solve the problem. Sometimes it just delays the outcome. So instead, I asked a different question. Do you still want this? Not out of desperation, out of clarity. She didn't answer immediately, and that pause told me everything I needed to know. Because when someone truly wants something, they don't hesitate to say it. I don't know, she said finally, and that was the most honest thing she could have said. But it was also the most definitive answer I could receive. Because uncertainty at that level isn't something you can negotiate with. It's something you have to respect. That was the midpoint where everything shifted. Not because she made a final decision, but because I did. I realized that I couldn't be in a relationship where one person was unsure about staying. Not because I needed certainty at all times, but because I understood something I hadn't before. Love requires presence. Not just physically, but emotionally. And uncertainty removes that presence completely. So I made a decision that felt both right and painful at the same time. I think we should take this as it is, I said. Not a breakup, not a fight, just acknowledgement of where we actually were. And for the first time since she walked out, there was no confusion, just clarity. And clarity, even when it hurts, is easier to carry than doubt. We didn't end things dramatically. No raised voices. No accusations. Just two people recognizing that what they had wasn't what they needed anymore. And that realization, while quiet, was final. She moved out a week later. Took her things. Left behind the space we had shared. But more importantly, left behind the version of us that we had been trying to hold on to for too long. Months passed. Life adjusted. Not quickly, but steadily. And the absence of constant emotional uncertainty became something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not because I didn't care about her, but because I was no longer trying to hold something together that wasn't stable anymore. We spoke once after that. Briefly. Respectfully. No tensión. Just two people who understood that timing, direction, and emotional alignment matter more than history. And sometimes, love doesn't end because something went wrong. It ends because something stopped moving forward.